Welcome to Sigest, your fortnightly serving of digestible science from plant and food research.
Welcome to Sigest. I'm your host for today, Erin Stroud. Most people will be familiar with the much-loved children's book, The Very Hungry Caterpillar by Eric Carle. As heartwarming as the tale about a caterpillar with an immense appetite is, the possibility of a real-life caterpillar coming to our shores and consuming a huge amount of fruit and vegetables is a much darker story. I'm here with Frances MacDonald and Jordan Pickering to chat about a new biosecurity risk, fall armyworm, and why we should be on the lookout for it and what we can and are doing about it. Welcome, team.
Kia ora.
So, Frances, you've been with Plant and Food for a little while now?
Yes, about 20 years, roughly, mainly working in outdoor vegetables, so integrated pest management in outdoor vegetables, looking at the good bugs and the bad bugs and supporting growers in their attempts to reduce the sprays they use. A lot of potatoes, a lot of lettuce, cabbage, and now corn and maize.
What's your preference, good bugs or bad bugs?
Oh, the bad bugs are interesting.
More fun.
I mean, a bad bug's just a bug in the wrong place, really, isn't it?
But, I love that. What
my
a tagline
job's
for them.
changed every year, depending on what the incursion is, because we've always got some new insect to study in the ecology of that. So, yeah, I've had
Dynamic
20
workplace.
different jobs. Yeah,
Very cool.
Yeah.
And Jordan, you're working with Frances.
Yes, I'm a summer studentship at Plant and Food this summer, and I was very lucky to have Frances as my supervisor this summer.
That was the right answer. Well done. And how are you finding your summer studentship so far?
Oh, I'm absolutely loving it. It's been an absolute blast. I've learnt such a broad skill set from everyone that I've managed to meet here, from learning how to identify new insects to learning how to edit, record, script a video.
Real world applications.
Yes.
How cool. So diving right in, tell me a little bit more about fall armyworm. It doesn't sound like an insect name, but it is, right?
Yes. Fall armyworm is a large night-active noctuid moth, and it normally predates on corn and maize, but one of the scary things to New Zealanders is that it has the potential to be harmful to some of our native plant species.
Oh, okay. Something to be worried about then.
Yes.
So it's a moth, but it has this larval phase, a caterpillar phase, and that's the one that's the issue?
That's
Yes.
the damaging life stage of fall armyworm. It's called fall armyworm because of fall, because it's a risk in autumn.
Right, okay.
It's at its peak, having sort of multiplied in generations over summer. Yeah. It's known to be most damaging on maize and corn, but as Jordan said, we need to know more. We don't know if it's going to move on to our native plant species. So that's part of Jordan's video, is to talk about that and highlight it.
So is this a new risk to New Zealand?
Yes. We believe it blew over to New Zealand from Australia in the beginning of 2022. It's native to America. And
Hence
has
the fall armyworm.
Yes, it's the fall. And yes, it's ravaged crops across the globe, making its way from America, through Asia, Africa, and then has recently blown over to New Zealand from Australia.
So it's obviously an issue overseas because of what it's doing to crop plants, but you're kind of hinting that maybe it eats other things as well. Is that the case overseas as well?
There are 350 plant species that it can potentially go on. So I guess there's the difference between what an actual host plant is or just a plant that it was found on. So to be a true host, it needs to have, laid eggs on that plant and gone through the whole life cycle and then mated and reproduced and laid eggs back on that. That's a host, as opposed to, I think what's happening now is it's moving off, like maybe the maize got harvested and it's wandered off to find something else so that it can pupate. So it's eaten some spinach or, a cabbage. It may not be a true host, but it's been found on a range of things so far, mainly maize and corn, but also potatoes, basil, in someone's home garden. So it's
not a picky eater.
No, no, not at all. I mean, there are different strains of fall armyworm as well, so it depends. There is one that has a strong preference for maize and corn and is unlikely to move on to other things, but there are other ones around as well that, if there's no maize and corn, they're going to be all right. They'll eat something else. It's just not their favourite. But in terms of when it showed up, it may have been sooner than it was officially notified. So we know that it's, probably been here for 2 good summers now.
Right.
Yeah.
So Jordan, you mentioned that it blew over. I'm picturing like a little caterpillar and like a hot air balloon.
Surprisingly, that is not too far from the truth.
Okay.
The fall armyworm moths are very, very good flyers. And if the wind directions and wind currents are right, they will just lift up on the wind and then just use that wind current to literally just float or blow over to New Zealand.
So we should be familiar with this concept, right? Because they think a similar thing happened with myrtle rust and other sort of diseases. So we really need to be worried about this as an incursion route for the future.
Yes, quite a few of our pests, I believe, blow over to New Zealand from Australia.
Do we send them back, or is it a one-way street?
It's like that's too controversial. I won't say.
They just
that.
pinch all the good stuff.
No, just like the things Australia send them to us.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean they do blow over every year, and even if fall armyworm hadn't blown in when it did, the likelihood of it happening again, even if we got rid of it, it's very high, and they are really strong flyers. So they came in on the west coast. That's mainly where it started showing up, sort of on that side of the North Island.
So where is it currently in New Zealand?
Well, it flew over to New Zealand and originally landed on the west coast, but it has spread throughout the entirety of the North Island and has the potential to move down to the South Island as well. So pretty much no matter where you are in the country, just be wary, because you could find it anywhere. It's
up in Northland in Te Tai Tokerau, so that's been the real focus for Jordan's video, is to make a video for mana whenua in Te Tai Tokerau for them to mobilise themselves and be part of their own surveillance rather than have, an official organisation come in and tell them how to do it. It's sort of about empowering them to do their own. And in particular, with the native plant species being at risk, that's a taonga that we need to try and protect and at least be aware of that it is a problem on any of those. Jordan can give you the list.
Tell me more about your project, Jordan. It sounds cool.
Yes, so the brief for my project was to help build biosecurity in Te Tai Tokerau, or Northland, as more people would probably know it by, and doing this using fall armyworm. So the aim or output for my summer studentship is a video which is going to be distributed to mana whenua and iwi in Te Tai Tokerau about fall armyworm, how to find it, identify it, and report it.
So you've created this video now, and I believe it's in both te reo and English?
It is, yes. I have made a version entirely in te reo and one version entirely in English.
Yeah, I've never heard of that before. How cool, and very important as well.
Yes.
I'm sure this fall armyworm will impact people in Northland quite severely if we're not sure what we're looking for. Is that sort of what your project's aiming to tackle?
Yes. The video is there to help mana whenua to be able to find this in their fields and how to best look for it, so that if on their regular walks through their fields, if they see a caterpillar, they can identify it, and if it is fall armyworm, then they can put that through the correct channels and then get help and deal with it as soon as possible.
So what sort of threat does this fall armyworm pose to growers up in Northland and the rest of the country? We've talked about how it can eat crop species, but we've talked about the fact that it might be threatening our taonga species as well, and also our horticultural crops. So what is actually happening on the ground in New Zealand?
Well, I guess the thing that I learnt from speaking, so the first I met a Māori dairy farmer up north, and there's feed and then there's horticulture. So they grow, and a lot of the growers up in Te Tai Tokerau are Māori growers, and they're growing maize to feed their cows, and they're also growing corn to sell as a food crop for people, and that's of a much higher value. So this guy was really concerned because, I mean, not so much for the maize. He sort of thinks, oh, well, the cows will eat a few caterpillars. But if the caterpillars get to the plants when they're still really young, the plants are just not going to yield anything of any value. And so, there could be hundreds of hectares of land that just get dug in and go to waste. So from a commercial perspective, and, Māori also lease land to growers up there as well. So it could be just quite devastating. And a lot of them are just growing maize and corn. They don't have a plan B.
It's hard to overstate the importance of this insect when you look overseas as well, isn't it? And a little bit of the reading that I did before we recorded this episode, they talk about the fact that if you hit a critical mass of a population, they can wipe out entire fields of maize and other crops within the matter of days. So the threat of that coming to New Zealand is massive, and it's something that we probably all need to be really aware about, isn't it?
Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely. Where we first saw it, the grower there had never previously sprayed his crops with anything as well. He was able to get most of it through unscathed. There are other caterpillars that go on maize and corn, and that was the distinction that Jordan's putting in his video, is how to tell the difference, because they've been around for years and we've had them in our crops, but they can be managed and they behave differently to fall armyworm and aren't as devastating. So if you think it's just another caterpillar, it's the worst one, and they're voracious.
The
Yeah.
potential losses if fall armyworm gets established in the country is huge. It's very scary to think of the implications of that. So every summer when you go to the supermarket, grab your $1 corns and chuck them on the barbecue with your steak, those days could be over if it gets established.
So gardeners at home also at risk of this sort of insect, or is it just going to be those commercial growers?
Yes, well, fall armyworm, if you've got any corn or any maize, it doesn't matter how large or small your crop may be, it will attack any corn or maize.
Not picky at all, eh?
No.
Yeah, one of the early notifications was actually from a guy in a small garden in the suburbs. He'd seen some advertising, which was great, promoting calling MPI. And he had a caterpillar, and he took a really good photo of it, which is really important. If you're going to send a photo in, make sure it's a good one. And they said, yeah, that looks like fall armyworm. So he sent it in, and it was.
And you mentioned the fact that native species could be at risk. Do we know what kind of species could be impacted by fall armyworm at this stage?
We don't know yet, but potentially they can attack kawakawa, kamokamo, tarata, kohia, kiakia, karetu, kumara, taiwa, and haria.
Okay, so we really can't be understating the importance of this pest.
No.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about fall armyworm, but how do you actually spot it? What does it look like?
Well, the first thing is to just get into your crop and actually look for the damage. The large caterpillars, the damage is quite easy to spot. They generate holes in the leaves and can damage the whorl of the plant. And the smaller caterpillars have less noticeable damage. They create windows in the leaf by eating the undersides.
So they're kind of hiding under leaves
Yes.
when they're eating. Okay, that
Yes.
makes them a little bit trickier to spot.
Yes, so you do have to get in there and look at the leaves, turn them over, and to be able to spot them.
You might see eggs. You might see an egg mass.
Yes, fall armyworm do have egg masses. They lay between 100 to about 300 eggs in a single mass. They're covered in a pale brown coating, and similar to the small caterpillars, are found underneath the leaves.
And I imagine they're not the size of chicken eggs. We're looking for something much
No.
smaller.
No, they are very small. I believe they're less than 1 millimetre in diameter.
Okay, so these aren't going to solve the chicken egg crisis
No,
of New
they're
Zealand.
not.
Okay, great.
Sadly not.
So the eggs could be something that will help us spot them alongside the damage to the leaf itself. What does the
Yes.
caterpillar look like?
Well, the caterpillar has quite a few distinct characteristics that help you separate it from other similar noctuid caterpillars. The main one is they have a Y shape on their head, or inverted Y shape on their head, which is very distinct. They also have 4 large dark spots on the last segment of their tail. They also have 4 spots in a parallelogram on all the other segments of it. And they have stripes on the side of the caterpillar. 2 light-coloured bands with a darker, wider band in between them.
God, you'd think that you've had to describe what they look like before. That was very eloquent. If, like me, you can't picture things that well with words, we will have some images up on our website as well that you can check out, so you can make sure you're looking at the right thing. Okay, so if we do find fall armyworm hanging out on our plants in our backyard or in our crops, what should we do when we find it?
Well, if you believe you've found or seen a fall armyworm, the best thing to do is to get in touch with the Ministry for Primary Industries, or MPI. You can contact their exotic pest and disease hotline on 0800 80 99 66, or you can actually log your find online. They have a website for that at report.mpi.govt.nz/pest. You could also just search up MPI pest in Google, and it will be the first link you find.
Awesome. And I guess when we're thinking about biosecurity responses, it's always best to be safer rather than sorry. So even if you find an insect that looks a lot like fall armyworm, but you might not be 100% sure, it's better to send it in and check, right?
Yes, it's definitely better to send it in and make sure it's not, rather than obviously the other case scenario where you don't send it in and it is.
And that can be handy data too, right? To know where it's not.
Yes, it is very handy data to know where fall armyworm isn't in the country.
They do actually stress that on the website. It does say we want to know the zeros as well as the numbers, yeah.
And they're very lovely people as well. I remember during the myrtle rust outbreak a couple of years back, I sent in some photographs, which didn't turn out to be myrtle rust, but the people were very lovely to talk to. So big props to MPI for their response team.
Everyone at MPI is amazing.
So speaking of MPI and scientists, what sort of role do scientists and science have to play in these biosecurity invasions or these risks that we're experiencing a lot more of these days?
Yeah, so for Plant and Food, as a research organisation, that's really our sort of wheelhouse, I suppose. So we're not really directly involved in response or surveillance, although we have programs that kind of overlap with it. And this one with Jordan is a B3 supported program with MPI. So one of the projects I'm involved with is surveillance. Like I've just said, we don't do that, but we do because it's information that feeds into our research. So I've got bucket traps out at 3 different sites around Auckland, and that started in November, so weekly checks and it has a pheromone lure in it, so we'll only catch males. And I've had a couple of catches so far that are being identified through MPI. I sort of see the future of where I go with this is eventually maybe fall armyworm will be what they call denuded, because at the moment we can't work with it. You can't collect it and have a colony of it or cultivate it in any way because it's still an unwanted pest. Once it gets denuded, we would probably get a colony of it, and I've already had people inquiring, people that manufacture insecticides and stuff like that, wanting to know where they can get a regular supply of that. So that would be something that we would be looking at. It may have blown over with resistance to insecticides from Australia, depending on what classes of insecticides they're using. We would want to know what we're dealing with in that regard. What are the best insecticides to use if you do have to use one. We do have some parasitoids in New Zealand, that one of which was introduced via the DSAR, I think, and it's already working on fall armyworm. It's been seen up in Te Taitokoro, called Cortesia ruficris. So she's already doing her bit, and the growers are noticing it on their plants. They're going, we're seeing the parasitoids all over the place. So that's a really cool thing. So the natural enemies start working and building up their numbers and responses to these huge numbers when they show up, and then maybe there's an equilibrium and things die down. So that's where I see what I'll be doing is the interactions with the beneficial insects and fall armyworm.
Are they parasitising the insect or the eggs, just out of interest?
They're parasitising the caterpillars.
Cool.
Yeah. I mean, what we don't have much of in New Zealand is egg parasitoids. There are some, but not many, and we're actually doing a survey at the moment which relates to brown marmorated stink bug, just to have a look at what we do have in the egg parasitoid toolbox. But yeah, this one, the growers are reporting that they're pulling open a caterpillar and they're seeing all the larvae of the parasitoids inside and stuff.
Oh wow,
this is pretty cool.
It's working. How cool!
It's like alien. Yeah.
I guess it's really hard to counter a biosecurity incursion when we don't know much about the thing that's coming in the first place. And I think one of the areas that I've seen a lot of research being done at the moment is where the caterpillar is going to establish within New Zealand and how that links to temperature. Is that something that you've been involved in?
I haven't directly, but I do have colleagues that are working on and doing the modelling based on recent weather events that we've just had, and winter's not being as cold, so we used to rely on cold winters wiping out these pests that would come in periodically. But I think this is a really good example of the fact that as the temperature rises, we are getting things moving in and sticking around. But like that sea snake, that's a lot more comfortable here than it would have been 20 years ago in the warmer seas. So, yeah, a lot of modelling going on that's sort of suggesting that, if fall armyworm sets up shop, it's going to be here to stay, and we won't be eradicating it, that's for sure. We're going to have to learn how to manage it in our growing systems, yeah.
Just another threat of climate change. How fun for us to all be dealing with.
Yes, as temperatures keep rising and weather becomes more erratic, they'll be able to establish even further south and longer and easier over winter.
Can also imagine more might blow over.
Yes,
with adverse weather conditions.
Yeah, potentially we have to look at, sometimes it's timing. It's when you grow that crop. So, it would suggest it's not really so much of a problem at the moment for some people when the numbers are still quite low. So maybe growing corn early is a potential option. But for a lot of the growers in Te Tautokoro, they're growing corn and maize almost all year round, certainly maize, with maybe a month or two break. So that's just a constant food supply for the pest and makes it difficult to manage.
So we've talked about the role that scientists and science has in biosecurity incursions, but what sort of role can individuals have during these events?
Individuals can have a huge impact on a biosecurity incursion. As we said earlier, when you're reporting your findings, every little bit helps. Because even if it's not fall armyworm, that gives us a negative detection zone and we know it's not there yet. So yes, any help, any caterpillar you might see that you may think is fall armyworm, just send it in because it is all data that is helpful.
And Francis, you mentioned earlier that one of the first findings was someone just looking on their own plants, wasn't it?
Yeah, they'd seen the ads. And I think, you hear people talk about citizen science. Maybe just one person on their own isn't having a huge impact, but if you've got a whole bunch of individuals doing that kind of thing, you can really get quite a good data set from that kind of thing. And people, talk about these things and share information. So, it could be, those networks are really important. Science relies on that stuff quite often, actually. And the growers are doing their own trapping as well, and they report back on that. And, growers now need to be, they're scientists as well, and they have a lot of knowledge. They talk to each other. So, it's important, those networks and the connection, and I suppose the partnerships. Like Plant and Food through B3 are really trying to strengthen their partnership with Māori in Northland. And it is fall armyworm in this instance, but it could be a different incursion at a different time. And if we have the kind of mechanisms to share information and find out how somebody might want to get that information, as opposed to here's a fact sheet and good luck. That's what Jordan's doing is really special, I think. It's a good starting point for us in that relationship.
Yeah, I think it's important to remember as well that it's everyone's responsibility to protect New Zealand's horticultural industry, but also our tonga species, which are at risk of fall armyworm as well.
100% agree.
We're
Cool.
all in this together.
Love that. Love that tagline.
Get out of here.
So, Jordan, as our new fall armyworm expert, is there any advice that you would like to leave our listeners with as they're walking through the bush or their backyards over the summer?
Yes. Well, if you're walking through anywhere and you notice any unusual feeding damage on any plants, take a photo of it or take a sample and send it into MPI, because any data is good data.
And you really never know how much you can contribute to these sort of events until it actually happens. Hey, what's that number again?
0800 80 99 66.
Well versed. Well done. Well, thank you so much, Francis and Jordan, for joining us today. It's been great hearing about the research that you've been doing and the work that you've been doing to protect New Zealand from the next hungry caterpillar.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Kia ora.
And thank you for listening. If you'd like to learn more about fall armyworm or other biosecurity threats to New Zealand, you can jump onto our website and learn more. And until then, mā te wā.